We're going to be talking about the democratization of data. So please join me in welcoming Ellie Young and Ashleigh Faith. Hello, hello. How are you two doing?
Great, thanks, Daniel. And I'm so glad to be here. My name is Ellie, as you mentioned, and I am head of community at KGC. So seeing a lot of different use cases for knowledge graphs and democratization opportunities.
Yeah, and I'm also equally excited to be talking to so many people that really understand this space really well, because democratization of data is so incredibly important for a lot of the work that I've either consulted on or I do in my day-to-day job. So I work with Ellie quite a lot on KGC kind of topics, which is great. And I've talked to Daniel and the rest of the Kraken crew. I should probably correct what I call it, but I'm getting used to it. But it's really exciting to see all the great work that's coming out of this place.
Absolutely, yes. We're all getting used to it, and we've already talked about how we're going to be. We might be typing Kraken for at least a month or two before we remind ourselves. But yeah, I'm really honored to be chatting with you two, and I'm so glad you both could join us for Orbit this year. So this topic is one that is. It's close to my heart in the sense that I've felt the pains of those that touch data but are separated distance, whether it's organizationally or otherwise, from the actual work being done on the data itself. And that can lead for marketers or for product managers, business analysts. It can lead to a lack of trust in the data that they're receiving and in the reports. And then, there tends to be a bit of like a telephone game that happens where a marketer might ask a question or want to ask a question of the data, but then that has to get translated into the actual query and analysis that's going to happen to then return the results. And so, I'm wondering, have either of you seen that in your own experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I see this on a daily basis. I have worked with a lot of government organizations where some of the data that's coming in is going to the analysts, but they say, well, how did you treat this data? And how did you, was this data, did you do this to it? Because there's this weird thing that happens with this kind of thing from this kind of sensor. That stuff happens a lot. And that's why subject matter expertise is so incredibly important to modeling the knowledge that we're all imparting into things. But just like you said, Daniel, that game of telephone, things can get lost in translation. So if you can have explainable AI and make it so that there is no more telephone, and maybe they do a shoulder tap if they're like, wait, I don't understand this because it's really complicated on something that's smaller, that's a real game changer, because you get that trust, but you also get shorter time to market. Right, and shorter insights because it's happening quicker than it did before.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting, kind of conversation, because I hear a lot from folks, about the power of graphs, and 2020 was the year of the graph, and you and I and everyone in this community knows what graphs can do. And yet I'm always hearing from the people that I'm talking to that it's really hard to make the sale, right? Like, how do you actually convince someone that you should invest in this project, or that you should believe in graphs, and sort of clarify what that is. And so I think that, what we're seeing in terms of, we're at this really beginning nexus point, right? So on one hand, we finally have a tool that can manage all of the profound complexity that we're finding ourselves in. And we kind of just need to figure out how to make that demonstrable to people in terms of, what does it mean if we're so used to just having profound data messes everywhere, right? Like, what would it mean to organize that? What would you be able to do? And finding those narratives and those use cases is really what this whole thing is going to rest on, right? Like, visualizing what business outcomes, knowledge graph, organized data, explainable data, being able to touch the data and understand it yourself, wherever your position is in the enterprise, what that can do.
Yeah, and I will say that one thing that I absolutely love about this tool that we're talking about, that Orbit is focused on, is it's open, which makes it so much easier to explain and say, hey, you know what? I have some engineers, they are diehard with their relationals. Have at it. Here's the thing. Go look at this use case. It's open, right? Like I have so many other people that I'm talking to that are not using open tools, or they're not using even, open libraries. And they turn around and they're like, oh, I can't find a data set to help me explain and actually show in practice how this is valuable. So it's almost like, because we have to put so many things up behind these firewalls and these barriers, that it's really hurting adoption. Now, of course, we can't make all data open. I know that's not possible, but little things like this, having places to go and really search and refine and be able to explore to your heart's content is a really big step forward.
Absolutely. I was just saying this like warm, fuzzy feeling of like, being able to open up access to the data and being able to empower confidence in working with that data to a whole new area of a workforce in an organization. That it's no longer just a data science or a PhD or an engineer that is able to find meaning and find insights from their data. That now, as a marketer, as a community manager, we're able to now draw those insights that can help us. And then, as you said, Ellie, it helps us move faster. It helps us be able to turn things around more quickly. It's really a powerful thing.
Well, I think also, just one thing off of what you just said, Daniel, is by democratizing this, you actually make a better case to your stakeholders as to why to go with Graph. Because if it is something that you can say, hey, you don't always need an engineering team, which is a lot more expensive, as a large team, getting it on the books, that sort of thing, then, having your PMs, your marketers be able to do it for you. That's a huge cost savings for a company, and your valuable resources that are engineers, they can be focused on things that are really focused on engineering, right? And that's really a big, powerful thing to this too.
Yeah, and I think, it's really interesting, Ashleigh, because your background is obviously like technical, and I come from sort of, field cases. I'm interested in sustainability, and I want to organize things so badly that I've discovered knowledge graphs. And so, I really think about all the front end pieces, and what's interesting to me is that the word data, right? It's like, it's so technical. It's buried inside of a PhD, and you have to have strange sounding skills like Sparkle and RDF and whatever to access it, or Grackle, right? Yeah. And yet what is data? Like, at the end of the day, I mean, it is just understanding what's going on, and you want everyone that's making decisions or even just making work products to understand like their context, who is my customer and what do they need and what's valuable, and having that working model so that, as opportunities come by, you can recognize them and you can act on them in an intelligent way. And, I think that's what that's what knowledge graphs make possible, right? Like, because you can connect pieces, you can see context, because it's machine readable, you can connect that with apps, and you can, distribute this information beyond not just the telephone game of sort of regular data, but the telephone game too of like interacting in business, right?
Finding meaning of your data. And that, I really resonated with that. That point in Heichel's keynote yesterday, where he talked about that TypeDB's type system it serves to bring meaning and help organizations find meaning in all of this complexity, which is will always be a net positive.
Yeah, and something else, going off of what Ellie just said, is yes, it's this distribution, but something else that I think is often lost is it's distributing the value and the efforts around responsible AI and risk assessment. Because if everybody can understand what risk looks like across the data, you don't have one data governance body or one analyst that's like really looking for that, or one system that's looking at it. You have potentially an entire organization that is trained enough and understands the data enough to say, oh, wait, that what's the smell test? Does it smell fishy? Then maybe do something with it. And they don't have to know how to fix it, but, to pass it up. And, I think that that's something else that with the understanding that everybody has, day-to-day people understand data a lot better than they did before. They understand they have data. Imparting this kind of knowledge to people, I think, is only going to grow, because a lot of people understand they have that data and they want to understand it and how to use it.
Is a piece of that actually being able to create a unified representation of an organization's domain, and so that you're expanding the understanding of the underlying model of an organization's data?
I think so, and the plug and play model, right? So I understand where the whole organization is. They always talk about pragmatic product development, right? You have to have an understanding from a company perspective what you're trying to do. But then how do I plug into it? How does my data plug into it? And that is where Graph shines, right? It's so flexible that you can do these things within the types, right? Like that is the power of the plug and play model. And I think that's really the part of it that people really appreciate, is it's not just yet another roadmap or yet another model. It's, oh, I can see myself in this thing. And that's really helpful too.
Exactly. It's equipping us all, us, knowledge workers with the tools of the job, right? And I think this also ties into why it can be so difficult to get at the value proposition of a graph, especially knowledge graph, because it's so expansive, right? Like maybe the rule of thumb is always start with a proof of concept, know your use case, be very clear about what this needs to do at the beginning, and then it can extend. And I think that's the key, right? It can always extend because inherently graph is flexible and it is able to cover the entire domain. And because of that, the value that can come from investing in graph, it's so hard to quantify, because it's a continual sort of elevated ability, right? Like it's the marketer who is able to actually see more detail into the customer, or it's the HR system. A really interesting graph case that I've heard of. There was a large enterprise that has lots of regulation. They've got to move labor around, but when they do so, there are laws applying to the technical training that these folks have to do. So it's a giant sort of Tetris, right? And graph allows that to be done in a far less expensive way in terms of manpower, but also in terms of potential mistake and outcome with compliance fees. And it's sort of, like that's really kind of quite easy to put a finger on, but that graph is certainly going to be able to extend to additional future use cases. And I think that's where, when you understand that, that's where you start to get really excited about, this is a paradigm shift, because we are going to just level up in our ability to do great things.
Yeah, and a real world example that I worked on in my past was with aerospace manufacturing, and there was some risk that was associated with some computer chips that were used in an aircraft. Well, we understood who the manufacturer of those chips were, right? So we were making the people I was working with were making the aircraft, and they knew who created the computer chips. But do you know where they got them? And do you know who had them before that? And what we actually found was, if you understand that entire chain, again, we were using a lot of graph technology to do that, you understand the risk. A very similar case in that same vein is there is a certain compound that is used in aircraft manufacturing that is illegal now to use in Europe. So it's not illegal in the US, but it's illegal in Europe. So now you have to track which aircraft parts are going in which directions, so you know that you're not, it was actually an environmental concern. So making sure that there isn't environmental issues that are stemming from one manufacturer. So you can see how graph has a huge impact in this, and being able to distribute that knowledge across the entire organization is pretty important.
That's I don't know if we, and I apologize, Ellie, I think we probably have time for one final thought, and then we'll have to wrap up. But yeah, please, Ellie, share.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I think the example when I really got what Graph could do and how essential and how kind of crazy it is when people don't have access to this in their enterprise. There's a content strategist in our community, and he was sharing about how, they work in video games, and that little E for everyone or whatever it is, the restricted, those symbols which are printed on the games, they are themselves regulated by a variety of different country laws. And so it's very quite complex actually to get the right code on the right package that's printed in the right place. And when you're a consumer and you look at the video game package or any package, you don't think about where all those different pieces of data are coming from.
Parents' nightmare.
Exactly. Yes. And so it's just, it's all around us, right? Like the world that needs Graph is everywhere, but kind of hard to see.
Absolutely. I wish we had another half an hour to chat. Ellie, Ashleigh, thank you so much for joining us. You both are incredible experts and wonderful additions to the Orbit roster. So thank you for being with us today, and everybody, thank you for joining.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us. Bye.